What's good, everybody? Welcome back. Fresh, new, uncreased episode of the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. I'm your host, Joey Powell. We are brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt. All right, fellas, to get this show rolling, Sean Moran is here, Sherrell McMillan is here. These dudes are going to bring the analysis that you crave. But, guys, I think one of the things that we wrestled with so much as a staff at IC, and really anybody who covered the team, nobody could seem to find the answers as to why this season was what it was. So, being charitable and cautious and a man of ingenuity that understands progress when he sees it, yours truly decided I'm going to find the answers. So, I went to Chat GPT and I asked the question about North Carolina. And for those of you unfamiliar with Chat GPT, it's an open source AI platform now that uses artificial intelligence all around the world to answer questions. So, but are you ready to learn what I learned from ChatGPT's open source AI platform?
I'm
Go
pretty
for it.
curious.
All right. The question I asked, why did UNC basketball lose so many games this season? And ChatGPT gave me, and I quote, as an AI language model, I don't have access to up-to-date information on the current season. However, in general, a basketball team may lose games due to a variety of factors such as injuries, lack of team chemistry, tough competition, or coaching decisions. Each game is a complex interaction of many factors, and sometimes even a small difference in one of these factors can determine the outcome of the game. It's important to note that even the best teams can have a rust season, and losing games is a natural part of the game. There we go. I mean, basically, Chat GPT is coming for our jobs. And honestly, even without, as it said, the most up-to-date stats on the current season, pretty much gave the best answer that I've seen anybody try to surmise about this current iteration of the Tar Heels. So, all that to say, I hope you guys can appreciate what open source AI has told us about this season. And now let's get on to what we know about the silly season, aka the offseason, since the Tar Heels put 2022 and 2023 to bed about a week ago tonight. And shout out to everybody who showed up for that live YouTube. We typically don't do these live, but shout out to everybody who watched that and then viewed the YouTube and listened to it later. I was like well over, I don't know, 10,000 people or something like that. So love y'all. Thank you for being a part of this. Let's get up to what we know right now. Sherrell, I'm going to start with you. I want you to reset what we know so far because you've done a phenomenal job, you and Ben Sherman both, of kind of giving folks what little information there is almost on a daily basis around the North Carolina basketball program, not only about who's leaving, but who's coming. So if you want, take a second, reset everybody as we sit here on March the 19th and let everybody know kind of what we're dealing with.
Well, unfortunately, there's a chance that by the time folks hear this, we're out of date. Because I think spring break was last week for UNC students, and everybody's back on campus or should be back on campus now. And so the meetings that didn't happen last week, or folks who wanted more than one meeting, they'll start having those. Probably it could be Sunday night, it could be today. In the next few days, those meetings will complete themselves. As far as what we know, so obviously Leaky Black and Pete Nance are done. They've exhausted their eligibility. Tyler Nickel entered the transfer portal on Monday, as did Justin McCoy. So those are, and Dontrez Styles as well. So those five are the ones who won't be back in Carolina. Two of them we knew, and then three of them entered the portal this past week. So you couple that with UNC having two freshmen coming in, and right now, if everyone else were to stay, they would have three scholarships available for the portal. There could be more attrition. There could not be more attrition. I think we're all kind of waiting to see what happens next. For those who are premium members, we've kind of tried to detail pretty much every night except for Saturday and Thursday, kind of a daily update on where we think things stand. And I think, as I said before, it'll start to pick up here in the next couple of days.
All right. That's a pretty solid reset. And Sherrell, again, I know folks don't like it when I give you guys praise and tell you you do good work, but I think most folks on IC will agree that you guys have really been after it the last little bit and getting what water out of a rock that you can with your sources around the program and understanding what's going on. So really quickly, and I don't want to talk about old news, but I do think it's worth mentioning from you guys, and I guess in an analytic standpoint, what is UNC losing in these players that have transferred? So we'll start first with Justin McCoy, transferred to North Carolina from Virginia, was on the team for 2 seasons, and then is going to leave to go somewhere for his grad season. Sean, I think a lot of folks, I don't know if it was just because he was coming from Virginia and was a local kid, a lot of folks had some expectations about what Justin McCoy was going to be able to do on the floor that he never really, at least in the time that he got it, never really seemed to click for him. What do you attribute that to?
I think it's a good question. Going back to when he did transfer, it was the first transfer for Hubert Davis, and I definitely thought that he was going to be able to come in as a junior and contribute off the bench. Probably 15 minutes a game. I thought he had been improving his sophomore year at UVA. He'd been getting some minutes that almost were steadily increasing during ACC play, and some of the games that I watched of UVA, I like what he was doing in those. So I thought he was going to come in and be able to. Definitely didn't imagine him being a all ACC or starter type player, but I definitely did think he would be able to help off the bench. He got time early on his junior year, and there was almost a logjam with Brady, Dawson, Armando that he was competing with, and obviously that got whittled down, and we've seen how Hubert played rotations. But it always looked like he was maybe his brain and his body weren't always in the same space. And I'm really going to be curious where he ends up, and if it is more of a mid major or low major, how he does, because he does have some size, length. We saw it towards the end of games when he did get in. He wasn't afraid to launch some threes, but unfortunately in the games at UVA where his minutes were needed, he wasn't able to kind of step up for those. Granted, you go back last year in Baylor, he was at least able to give some serviceable minutes. So, I was surprised that it didn't materialize earlier, but I think once we saw last year, there weren't a lot of expectations coming into the season.
And from my interactions with him, he was always a very positive, great kid. Uh, Sherrell, am I stretching it saying that the most athletic play we saw from him was the last one he got against Boston College in the ACC tournament?
I have to think about that one, but I don't I don't think it's far-fetched at all. It's funny just because when he first arrived, like he kind of took a leadership role from everything that we heard.
Yeah.
Was very strong in the locker room. And man, heading into Hubert Davis's, first exhibition games and first practices, there was a ton of buzz about Justin McCoy potentially not only playing a lot of minutes, but starting either at the 3 or the 4. And I guess just whatever he was doing in practice didn't carry over to games, or as Sean said, having Garcia and Manic there ahead of him, eventually their talent kind of won out. But I was surprised that we never got like the Justin McCoy game. I thought there'd be one of those because he always struck me as a player who would out of nowhere go for 15-9 in an important game. And some of it's probably opportunity, but it didn't materialize. And the good thing is he has the COVID year, so he can go somewhere else and try to get some more playing time. And I think the coaching staff and McCoy had a good conversation, understanding what his role was going to be, and that's why he chose to go elsewhere.
Yeah, and again, I want to preface all of our conversations here that I think I speak for you guys. We have always been of the mindset that like whatever is best for these kids, man, go do it. Get it how you live. You go do what's best for your career because we only get one try at this life thing. And these guys, their window to really shine or kind of make their impact in the basketball world is even more truncated. Next guy we'll come to Tyler Nickel. I think this is the one that a lot of folks kind of gasped a little bit about. I do think, and Sherrell, we talked about this before we started, but it's been weird to see everybody kind of with all the message board posts and kind of the chatter on social media and everywhere about folks really wanting to see a turnover in the locker room. And now instantly, as soon as the transfer portal opens, as is now customary in college basketball, UNC has some defections. And I think folks just started hand wringing all of a sudden. And just it's a different world now. People, this is the landscape of college basketball. You can dislike the portal all you want, but it's here to stay, and it may be altered in the future. But you need to get used to until there is a a transfer penalty instilled or something like that, you need to get used to this, and complaining about it does nothing. So I think the first one I think that a lot of folks kind of got in their feels about was Tyler Nickel. And we were really adamant on here about just his confidence as North Carolina was recruiting him, his ability just to score. And it was really weird to see a guy who has the Virginia scoring record. And by all intents and purposes, and every story we've ever heard, and even when you guys saw him, was just a pure bucket. Sean, what do you see as Nickel leaves the program, a team that couldn't shoot last year, and now the guy who is known for shooting didn't play and is on his way out the door?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just mentioned it having to do what's best for the player, and I think anybody that was on the bench, they've seen now 2 years of how Hebert uses that bench. So I think it no matter how much you improve, I think it could be a question mark of what's in store. I think out of the transfers so far have been probably most disappointed in Nichols leaving, because I do I think it would have been fun watching him grow. He came in as a low 4-star, so we talked about it all the time last summer and leading up to this year. We didn't have a lot of expectations for him this year, especially some of the agility / defensive limitations we thought. But he shot 6 of 27, so 22% from three in the game. So it wasn't like he was knocking them down, but it is super hard, super tough when you might get one shot at most, and that's a lot of pressure on that one shot in each game versus hey, I'm going to get 3 or 4 or be able to play through some mistakes. I think we saw some great moments. Ohio State, the block that he had, played very well against Syracuse, and to me he was one of the highest IQ basketball players on this team in terms of offensively. The ball was never sticking in his hands, which I think was one of the huge issues throughout the year. It was either going up, which we needed because there was a lot of 3-point shooting, or he was attacking or kicking it. So I'm going to be interested to see, does he stay ACC level, high major, or does he go to a local school like JMU or somewhere else where he can, get a ton of shots? But I think he's a guy that would have been fun to see grow, but at the same time, I don't think a whole lot would have changed next year. Maybe a few more situational moments, and wish we had seen him a little bit more this year, because I think that 3-point shooting, I don't think the percentage reflects what he could have done.
Yeah, I love that you shared that, because he's absolutely the type of player that I think North Carolina fans are used to seeing mature within the program, and then by the time his career's over, he's absolutely lighting things up. And I still say whoever gets him and gets his services, regardless of what level they're on, if he plays, he's going to be a problem. Sherrell, any color you want to add to Nichols' transfer and decision to leave the program?
Yeah, I don't think it was a dislike for North Carolina or anything like that. Pretty much everyone who comes to UNC, outside of a few, genuinely do fall in love with the place. I think this was really 100% about playing time, and I think he wanted to be on the court, and maybe he thought he was going to be on the court more, or was told he was going to be on the court more, and it didn't materialize. And so he said, I want to go play. Because, I mean, he is one of those guys who's a super serious basketball player. That's like, they talk about Kevin Durant, how like the only thing he loves to do is play basketball. I'm not going to say that much for Tyler Nickel, that the only thing he loves, but I don't think there's anything he loves to do more than play basketball. So that's a huge part of it. It's just he wanted to be on the court, and so he'll have their opportunity. Like you said, that's the good thing about the transfer portal, is that if you aren't happy with your situation and you want to play more, then you can choose to do so at least once without having to sit out. So he chose to exercise that right.
And so notice folks who are freaking out and hand wringing about what this looks like with people leaving North Carolina. There was no animosity. It was strictly about playing time. So keep that in mind. And then the last one we'll talk about, I think this is another one for different reasons why folks may have kind of had a furrowed brow about it. Dontrez Styles, after 2 years in a North Carolina uniform, hometown kid. We know the lineage from Kinston to Chapel Hill, and what sort of path has been worn between those two towns. But Dontrez Styles, a guy who showed some promise last year in that run to the national championship. Again, he'll always be remembered by a lot of Tar Heel fans for the big three he hit to open overtime against Baylor when North Carolina was absolutely on the ropes. Had all the athleticism in the world, and just never really got to see the floor this season, especially if you consider, what playing time he got last year. He saw less this year for the Tar Heels. Sean, you want to give some insight there?
Yeah, and after last season, we were chatting. When it was looking at the transfer portal for that 4-5, 4-3. Is it somebody coming in, or is it Puff and Styles filling that role? And what we saw in both the Marquette and Baylor game, I thought there was that opportunity for him to take a freshman to sophomore year jump. And it's kind of crazy looking at the stats and seeing that he only took, I think it was 19 shots on the whole season this year. Because it felt like when he was coming in, it was frustrating seeing really a lot of long twos or some threes, which we know isn't his strong suit. And I think right now in basketball, tweener is now, you kind of always want these tweeners, but I think he was still a tweener that couldn't, he was kind of, I still think he was best suited for that four role. And a guy that is diving to the basket in the pick and rolls, a guy that's moving off ball, crashing the boards, getting out in transition, because the 3-point and the jump shot was not there, and that's what he still tried to do this season. So once again, another player I think that normally we could have seen develop, where junior, senior year he is contributing, but at the same time, there's just too many non-shooters on this team this past year, and kind of bringing him off the bench wasn't you weren't bringing in a potential shooter to try to solve any of the issues. So once again, not a surprise that this came about. I'm going to be curious if it is Vandy. Hopefully it's not somebody in the ACC, and then he's the one going for 20 and 10. But once again, you go back to that Baylor game, the 3-point shot he hit, huge shot. I mean, could you imagine if right now, last year the season had ended with that a loss to Baylor, and we were going through this season, it would be even more challenging than it is. So he stepped up when it was needed. I think there's a lot of hype from people that had seen him in practices his freshman year, that what he was going to do, and maybe he's going to the league after 2 years, which I think we always thought was far fetched. But once again, just the role didn't fit who he was, and hopefully he can find that going forward, because he is really athletic, he's strong, and I think he can, if the role is right, I think he can produce for a team.
Sherrell, similar to Justin McCoy's last appearance for the Tar Heels, Dontrez Styles hit a three from the top of the key in in what might have been his last minutes for UNC. I can't remember if that was in the UVA game or the Boston College game, but again, just stepped up and stroked one. So I'll ask you the same thing, Sherrell. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, or any sort of context you can give to his departure from Chapel Hill?
Yeah, kind of the same situation. Was told it was a business decision, and that he wanted to play, and that through 2 years he'd kind of seen that he probably wasn't going to play much at UNC, that he loved UNC. He's one of those dream school kids that Carolina's always where he wanted to be. So I think when you talk about the reaction to it, that's definitely part of it, because he's an in-state kid. And then I think if you look at him and Nickel together, each of them were purported to provide something that UNC severely lacked this season.
Yeah.
So Nickel was 3-point shooting, which that he's shown throughout high school and AU that he could do it. And then Styles was just the athleticism and kind of that rebounding that athlete that North Carolina just hasn't had in recent years. And so from the fan base, I guess they're looking at, well, if you're struggling in these two areas and these two guys you say are good at these two things, why aren't they playing? And so I think that's where the struggle comes in, and why folks don't really understand it, and why they've kind of reacted the way they have. But with those two guys, I think it's a very similar situation.
I think those are valid questions. If you're looking at the traits those guys are touted for, and then what North Carolina lacked, you're exactly right. And I think those are valid complaints and valid criticisms, and definitely something that the coaching staff, will probably have to answer for very early in the season next year. I think something that's important to remember that is not going to leave the North Carolina program, and that's Johnny T-Shirt. Johnny T-Shirt has been on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill through all sorts of coaching change, through ups and downs, good seasons, bad seasons. And even when the transfer penalty was lifted, Johnny T-Shirt's still there. They're still there for you, our listener, our viewer, the IC subscriber. and they're still giving you that beautiful 10% premium discount off top of their amazing prices and their great selection. I think that it's really important to consider Johnny T-shirt's contributions to Inside Carolina and how much of a stalwart they have been in our locker room and how much they can be relied upon. That even when maybe they don't get the playing time that they want, Johnny T-shirt still shows up. So big ups to Johnny T-shirt. Be sure you visit them on East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill or hit them up online, johnnytshirt.com. Take a quick break. Let some other companies run their advertisements here. Nobody's sure who's gonna show up, but we appreciate them nonetheless. They're gonna run some ads. We'll be right back. Talk a little more transfer portal talk here on the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. All right, thank y'all for being here. Appreciate you sticking around, checking us out, whether you're watching on YouTube, hello, or listening to us on whatever form you get your podcast from. We're glad that you're a part of the show and part of our little Coast to Coast family. As always, with me tonight, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan, talking a little Tar Heel transfer portal, both in and out. We've talked about the guys that are going out. Now let's talk about how North Carolina is going to fill those gaps. Sherrell said earlier, 3 scholarships as things sit right now. That could always change. By the time this podcast hits your feed, things can be different. We don't know, but we're giving it to you as we sit right now. There are those number of scholarships, and we can also report that North Carolina has made contact and has scheduled an in-home with Nick Timberlake. Not sure if he is any relation to that guy who used to sing for NSYNC, but he is definitely a shooter, and I'm sure North Carolina has cried many a river about their inability to hit jump shots this past season. He's a guard from Towson up in Maryland, 6'4", 205, originally from Braintree, Massachusetts. Guys, he's a 38% career three-point shooter, including almost 42% this past season. He averaged 17.7 points per game. Sean, what can you tell me about Nick Timberlake?
I mean, I think you just did it. We're good with that description. But here's a guy. He's going to be 25 when the season begins. So he did a year of prep school coming out of Massachusetts. I think coming out of high school, he didn't have any Division I or Division II offers. He played pretty well at prep school. Ended up at Towson. So started in 2018-19 season where he got 8 or 9 games, redshirt, and then went through COVID, etc. Didn't really shoot the ball that well early on, but past 2 seasons, his junior and senior year, he's been above 40%, hit close to 93s on the season, and was really efficient, earning all CAA honors and putting up some pretty good offensive numbers on a team that gave Charleston a challenge in the semifinals of the CAA tournament. But 6'4", what's he going to do? He's a shooter, catch and shoot. 93% of his 3-point shots were assisted. So he's not going to catch the ball and you're not going to see the step backs or off the bounce threes that I think we saw a lot of the time this year. So he is a catch and shoot guy. Really good coming off pin downs and curling. Quick release, pretty explosive off of 2 feet vertically, whether that's on threes or he is explosive at the rim, but still not a great finisher. So in terms of how he gets his buckets, 3-pointers, and he's pretty good 1-2 dribble pull-ups as well in terms of doing something quick. But you're not going to see a guy going isolation, breaking players down. As we mentioned, at the rim in transition, he's pretty explosive, but in terms of a crowd, he can struggle with that. He played 3 games against Charleston this year. Obviously a 12 seed, and had, I'd say, a little bit of a mixed bag. 2 games with under a 100 offensive rating, but the one he did was he had 34 points at 6 of 11 threes against them. Also played against Clemson earlier in the year, a game Towson was in the lead for the most part. He had 130 offensive rating there, and it was only 2 of 7 from 3, but 6 of 11 for 2. And then last year he had a game against Wake Forest where he was average. So you're going to get an older, a veteran guy that has a little bit of cockiness to him, and isn't afraid to show that on the court. But a 3-point shooter and a guy that can hit from 1 or 2 one or two dribbles as well.
Shout out to everybody who just heard Sean talk about a guy that can stroke it from three regularly and immediately turned up their volume. Sherrell, anything you want to add to that as far as context or what you might know about how this, I guess, transfer recruitment looks?
Yeah, it's still early. We haven't been able to talk with him, but I want to kind of talk about taking one move that the Carolina staff makes and trying to make it apply to the plan. So follow me here. I'm gonna take you down a path. Crimson Tide, 1995, was one of my favorite movies. It's Denzel Washington, it's Gene Hackman, just master thespians going at it on a submarine. And the whole deal is they get an emergency action message that they think says fire a nuclear weapon, but it's incomplete. And so Denzel Washington is like, we don't know what this means. We can't judge the whole message because we only have a part of it. And Gene Hackman's like, no, fire, let's kill them all. And so
Which
there's
is the
this
most Gene Hackman role ever, but
it
go
is.
ahead. Yes.
It is. So there's this back and forth. And I think that's what we're seeing kind of the reaction to UNC going in home with Timberlake this week. Shouts to Elena, the biggest Timberlake fan of all time. Um, and it's like you can't judge exactly this individual piece because we don't know the full plan yet. In isolation, what was North Carolina awful at last year, historically bad at last year?
Perimeter shooting.
And Sean said that that's his biggest strength. So just take it for that. Take it as North Carolina was bad at shooting last year. They're trying to get better at shooting next season. It doesn't mean that this player is leaving or that they're recruiting him to be this role or that he's going to play 39 minutes a game. It
Or that
means
they view him as the best player available and none of that stuff.
yeah. It just means that right now there's a good shooter in the portal and they're talking to him. Outside of that, we don't have any additional information. So don't try to judge the plan based upon this one piece of it, would be my advice. All that said, yeah, I mean, Sean put it out there. He's a good shooter, and North Carolina didn't shoot well last year, so they're trying to get better at shooting.
So let's take that a little bit further. What can you share with us about what you're able to tell about what North Carolina's plan may be? I think one of the most obvious quotes that stuck out from folks about what Hubert Davis has said, other than calling the portal speed dating, which I think is an appropriate explanation. Coach Davis said something to the extent of he's not going to really know what their portal shopping looks like until they understand their needs. I'm probably butchering that quote a little bit, but that was the gist of it, correct? All
Yeah,
right,
correct.
Okay, so Sherrell, what can you glean this early in the process that North Carolina's plan may be? Because again, there's still teams playing. There's still going to be 16 teams playing after this finishes tonight, and so there's a lot of stuff that really isn't even up to full speed yet. So, give us the haps there, bro.
I think the biggest thing right now is that they want to get better. And to your point, they have to know who is staying, who's leaving, who's doing what. And even if it's not announced publicly by individual players or what have you, I think they'll have a good idea probably by the end of this week, I would anticipate, about who's doing what. And they can be a little more aggressive because right now, there's not a ton in the portal because there was, to your point, a whole bunch of people still playing this weekend. I think by Friday is when you'll see, a jump from, I think there's 1,000. It'll probably jump another 1,000, I would imagine, in the next 3 or 4 days, just because the tournament's over, things are starting to settle, and guys can start figuring out where they want to go. And it's still North Carolina. And no, people don't believe that, especially inside the inside Carolina bubble, because everything seems so rough right now, considering the season they had. But they're still going to attract top players. We know that, I would say you can contact the UNC staff without contacting the UNC staff to let them know that you're interested, if that makes sense. You can like a post on Instagram, or you can talk to your homeboy, but there are ways to kind of like, hey, I'm interested. And it goes on everywhere. And I think that's kind of where things stand now. And from what we can gather, there are definitely people, of value who would help UNC, who are interested. So they obviously had to replace Nance and Leaky in their starting five, considering that Styles is gone and then Nickel is gone. It seems there's a huge glaring hole at the three that they have to get someone from the transfer portal is so hard to
You'll
say.
get it right by May. It's fine.
For the transfer portal to start at 3. So we know they're looking at a 3. They would prefer someone who has an ability to shoot, who has an ability to drive, to get more offense out of that position. They obviously are looking for additional help in the post. And if the Timberlake interest, aside from him just being a shooter, is there, then you have to assume that they're okay if the shooter maybe comes at a position that they might already have people at, if that makes sense. So the plan seems to be multiple guys from the transfer portal to come into UNC, guys who are versatile, guys who are athletic, and guys who can shoot. That's what we can glean so far.
And obviously, it's a moving target, right? Like as players become available, if somebody pops up on North Carolina's radar that they weren't obviously looking at that expresses interest, then things can change. So yeah, this is absolutely a moment in time podcast as much as we wish it were otherwise. Sean, I think some folks see a guy like Nick Timberlake and they're like, yeah, okay, he's from the CAA and North Carolina's had a couple of transfers in the past from that conference and conferences like that. And people may have, baggage about that, but having seen the first 2 rounds of this tournament and just understanding what transfers have done for college basketball in general, help me understand why that might be a bit of a misnomer and that might be a little bit of jumping the gun.
Yeah, well, a few different thoughts. One, you can go through pretty much all the teams now, and you're looking at, hey, where did these guys come from? And you're seeing, maybe they've been at two different schools before getting to where they are right now at the Sweet 16. And some of these guys are continuing to move up. Xavier's in my mind as one example right off the top. And the other, before I kind of go more macro, but you look at Wake Forest and Appleby this year. I don't think anybody this time last year looking at his Florida stats was going to imagine the jump that he could make at Wake Forest and what he did. Really for shout out to Wake Forest for what they've done the past 2 years in the transfer portal and the improvements that those players have been made. So I know we get caught looking at what did they do this past year, but so much is about fit and situation. And I think that still is a big question mark as to how could they fit in with UNC, who's coming back, et cetera. But in terms of the CA, obviously Justin Pierce, William Mary played a few years ago. And I think athletically, we knew that was going to be a huge step up, which was a struggle. But, there's a few other examples. Michigan State, Tyson Walker, UNC fans got to see him in person at Northeastern early on before he decided to transfer. And even though he was super small, I think CAA Player of the Year or one of the top players, but he went from averaging close to 19 points a game at Northeastern to 8 points per game his first year at Michigan State. Now year number 2, he's up to 14.5. So took really the first year to get adjusted. He was serviceable, but now really stepping into his own this year, led Michigan State to the Sweet 16. And then you have Cam Winter, a guy who played at Drexel, 6'2" guard, similar accolades of all CAA 2 years in a row. He ended up at Penn State, and he went from 16 points per game to 9 points per game. Once again, for a tournament team, but there has been that drop off. So for Timberlake, what he was averaging and getting up 6, 8, 10 threes a game, that's not going to happen most likely at a Power 5 school. But I think you look at what does he do really well, and it is moving off the ball, it is quick release, utilizing screens. So once again, is it the dribble handoffs and look at ISO? That's not going to do him well. But if you can work to get him looks, I think it'd be definitely a bigger upgrade than Kerwin Walton, who you needed to do a little bit more to get looks. And I think he can move off the ball. He can once again struggles a little bit in transition, but I think if you find him in the right role, he can do his thing at a Power 5 school. Last thing to add, Sherrell put this in his scoop. I think it was on the Thursday scoop, but it might have got lost in terms of people trying to guess who the player X was going to be that was going to be potentially transferring out. But talked to an assistant coach in the CAA that did pretty well against Timberlake this year as well last year, and he said, "Hey, he's a really good player, can really catch and shoot with the best of them, whether it's flying off staggers or in transition. And he's got a pretty good mid-range game as well, which we talked about, but not a great finisher around the basket. And if you can stay attached to him through ball screens and off-ball screens, you can limit him." So, that came from a coach that saw him up close and prep for him. But once again, I think it goes into the situation that UNC could potentially put him in, and who are they surrounding him with, in terms of how well he could potentially do next year.
Yeah, and I wanted to add too, Sean. I think folks also have to be careful in looking for in turning it into like a math contest and putting into an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, who averages 15 points? Who averages 40% from three? Who averages 50% from two? And who shoots 75%, from the free throw line? Filtering out everyone who's not there and say, okay, Carolina needs to pick one of these six guys. It doesn't really work that way. I know there are exceptions and there are rules, and I think Ricky Council the fourth could be an exception. I don't know, but uh, Carolina fans are pining for someone like that, a athletic guy who can shoot, who can take over games, and the big bad SEC. Arkansas got him, and it's like he started 7 games at Wichita State last year. So, it's not a situation where he was averaging 20 points a game and someone dropped a huge NIL bag to get this massive star to come to Arkansas. He was a guy at Arkansas who got better over the last year and became the guy in the SEC for a team who just beat a number 1 seed. So I think you have to be careful about looking only at stats. They should be a piece of the puzzle when it comes to trying to figure out how a particular player might fit at Carolina. Because if you I need to go look at the roster, but if you go to Wichita State's roster and pick a guy who started 7 games, the fan base, and I think anyone who covers will be like, oh, they can't take that kid. Like, he started 7 games at Wichita State. But you have to look deeper than that. You have to talk to people, and that's why I think Hubert Davis calls it speed dating, is because you have to do all that within like a week or two to really be in the game.
And there are certain publications that are helping teams with some of this information. I don't know if UNC is using any of them, but just talking to the CAA coach, he said, "Hey, we're monitoring the portal. We've got a few sources that help us out, et cetera. But in addition to synergy, Ricky Council, I think, is a good example where you look just at the numbers and not going to blow you away, but I'm sure Arkansas, they're looking for athleticism, which he had. He, free throw rate in terms of him getting to the rim, shooting wasn't jumping off the page, but especially in the SEC, you need that athleticism, and somebody that can, create their own shot. And he's been able to, once again, that was a perfect fit for him. But I think, not to go on a side comment, but you're seeing the SEC do really well. I think there's multiple reasons for their improvement in basketball, but they have been identifying players that fit their style in the transfer portal, Arkansas, Alabama, etc., really well. And I think that's one of many things the ACC needs to catch up on. But I think that's one realistic thing that the ACC and UNC can do in terms of identifying potential players. And sorry, last thing, I think last year UNC was almost pigeonholed in terms of what they could do in the transfer portal, because they had, hey, you're up 15, you just made the championship game, you got 4 guys coming back. So you're really only looking for that one position. So you were looking at either the 4-3, 4-5, and it was really 2 players that they looked at. I think this year now it can be much more wide open. And now you're trying to create a new identity, create a new team that can fit around a few other pieces, but you're not pigeonholed because so many players are coming back from a team that went to the championship game.
And last thing on that, Sean, people got to remember too, Kerwin Walton didn't enter he had told Carolina he was coming back, and then he didn't enter the portal until the very last day.
Yeah.
So they didn't even know they were going to need anybody in the portal until that day. Yep. And that's why, it kind of went from nothing to Meyer and Pete Nance last year.
Yeah, just reminded everybody who's listening, there's different levels to this ish. Shout out to Meek Mill. I mean, stuff is nuanced. This is not as cut and dry. Just like, this Unfortunately, this podcast may be dated as soon as you hear it, but this is a very fluid situation, to steal one of Sherrell's words.
You see Sherrell checking his phone.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And he's not checking it for the same reason you and I are. All right. Boys, anything y'all want to get in before we get out of here? Sean, I'll go to you first.
No, I mean, I think right now there's a lot in flux. So, you look at Timberlake in a vacuum and, it doesn't get anybody super excited, but right now there's not a lot in the portal that is getting anybody super excited. But
Right.
UNC, hopefully UNC is going to have to identify players quickly. It is disappointing when you're seeing some of the young guys leave, especially guys that Hubert recruited. But once again, you're coming back to a team that had 4 guys that you knew were going to play 35 minutes, and you had 11 guys that we think could play. And unfortunately, some of those guys didn't really get the chance to develop off the bench. But, it's not wiping the slate clean, but here's an opportunity where you don't have to, wait 2-3 years for guys to develop. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next week or two. But, watching all these tournament games is definitely frustrating, seeing some of these teams in there and seeing teams, Carolina was better that not getting the shot, but at the same time, hopefully they can create a new identity and get some players that can really improve both the offensive and defensive play that we saw from this past year.
All right, Cheryl, you're up to the line.
Really nothing more to add. It's just to Sean's point, these next couple of weeks will be very they'll be stressful for us, but I think they'll be fun for the fan base as new names emerge and people do deep dives on names. And by the time they do a deep dive, the name is committed elsewhere or is taking a visit elsewhere, and then there'll be a new name and it'll keep going. And the other thing to remember is, to Joey's point about everything being fluid, a player can say that they're staying on March 19th, as we saw last year, or April 14th, or whatever it was, and change their mind. The portal doesn't close for 60 days until 60 days after it opens. So that's roughly May 13th, basically, is when it closes. So it is a roller coaster. So things can change very quickly, and you kind of have to make sure, if you're the UNC staff, that you're still talking to your guys, even though they may have said they're coming back. Still talk to them and say, are you sure you're good? Anything we can help you with? And then, continue to monitor, because there could be a similar situation where a guy, player X at a different school was really good, had told his coaching staff that he was coming back, and he changes his mind. And then suddenly, there's a chance that you can get a really good player. So I think they'll be patient. They're not going to sign 4 guys next week because they're kind of portal veterans now. I mean, they've been through it now. This is the 3rd offseason that they'll have the portal and have all those things that can happen with it. So I think they've gotten pretty comfortable with it and knowing how fast to move.
And I think we've seen, whether it's recruiting or the portal, UNC can get somebody when they really want. I think Mayer always mispronounce. They wanted him, they didn't get him. I think there are other reasons in play for that, but they can get people. They just need to make sure they're identifying and fitting them into the right roles.
And I want to reaffirm that on this show, we all agree that player X is overrated. So just want to make sure folks remember that.
Why would they recruit player X? I do not understand.
Player X has so many off the court issues, a lot of handlers. Is typically just not the type of player that North Carolina gets involved with. All right, y'all. I appreciate you. I know you've been kind of grinding a little different schedule this week, Sherrell, and we certainly appreciate it on behalf of the subscribers. I know they love it too. But boys, we'll talk to you very soon, maybe sooner than usual. But at minimum, we'll be back next week for another episode of the Coast to Coast podcast. For Sean Moran, for Sherrell McMillan, shout out to Johnny T-Shirt for sponsoring. Shout out to John Siegley for producing. I'm just Joey Powell. We will catch you next time on the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. Late.